Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coby's Brain. Yeah, it's great to have you all back on the show. Hope you're tuning in live via Twitch, but if not, that's okay. We look forward to you seeing it on YouTube afterwards. We are joined again by our good friend of the show / its technical director, Sagar / Teddy Toast. Give it up for Teddy Toast.
Thanks for having me, Coby's Brain. I'm always excited to be on the show.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on the show. It's been a little while since you've been on the show, but
Several days. I mean, that's almost too much time for a piece of toast.
yeah, I completely agree. There's a good camera angle right there. Okay, so Teddy Toast. Fill me in. How you doing today?
I'm chilling, Coby's Brain. I feel like I've got some opinions. I know a little bit about what we're talking about today, but it's definitely mostly going to be on the fly. So I'm excited to dig into VR storytelling and what that means for creators who are trying to do that kind of work.
Yeah, it's a super interesting topic that we're going to be covering today, which is, as Teddy Toast kind of said, we're going to be talking about VR storytelling, which is kind of a crazy topic if you think about it, because, we don't really know. People don't really know what that's going to entail yet for sure. I mean, there have been some examples as Teddy Toast can obviously attest to, but, it's this new medium. It's emerging. And it's still really in its infancy, and people don't know what the answer to the question of what makes good VR storytelling is. So, Teddy Toast, that brings us to our first question: is what do we know? In 2021, what do we know about VR storytelling?
Before we dig into this, I feel like it's worth saying that my opinions as a sentient piece of toast do not reflect my employer or Sagar's employer. They're just my toasty opinions.
Yeah, so that's a good disclaimer right there.
We can dig into it. So right now we know that a bunch of creators are starting to experiment with VR as another means of distribution, and we know that VR stories are super distinct from what we're used to with 2D filmmaking. It's a completely different language. There's a lot more opportunity for interactivity to actually bring the audience in to sort of have agency as part of the story. And we'll talk about a couple examples of what that actually looks like in practice, but the entire field is still super, super nascent. So a lot of creators have the opportunity to explore basically what the boundaries of VR storytelling are, and no one's really figured it out.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's a good point. But I'm just like, it has been around for a little bit though. Like we've had, consumer VR headsets and people trying to tell stories in VR for how many years would you say now? How long has Oculus, sold consumer headsets and had quote unquote VR stories on its platform?
Yeah, so Oculus Story Studio was probably one of the first groups to sort of popularize the idea of having VR narratives that were distributed on the Oculus platform. And, they were doing work around maybe like 2014, 2015. They were starting to release stories like Dear Angelica, Henry, Lost, all examples of what creators can do with VR, sort of pushing the limits and trying to figure out where to guide creators in terms of, what the medium's capable of. So I would say, I think that's when a lot of creators started popping up, or studios started popping up that were focused on VR storytelling specifically. There are a lot of other groups as well, Felix and Paul, Targo. I know a bunch of other creators who are doing some really phenomenal work with, 360 video, with interactive animation. So a lot of that started happening maybe, 5 or 6 years ago at this point, and it's only ramping up as more people start getting headsets, more people start understanding what VR can offer, and frankly, more people are actually getting into the development side and creation side and starting to explore how they can actually start making stories of their own. So I think you're right, Coby's Brain. It's been around for a while, and we definitely have learned things, but there isn't necessarily a clear winner yet in terms of a super popular Toy Story equivalent of a VR story.
True. So we haven't hit that quite yet. I mean, I might push back slightly on that because I personally have seen some pretty cool examples. I think Vader Immortal, which was the ILM X Lab Oculus collaboration, which allows you to engage with like on a personal level with Darth Vader, and have lightsaber fights. It was, I think, a pretty good example because it was fun. It had interactivity, and it allowed you to kind of develop a relationship with a character that you couldn't really do with, say, like a video. So considering examples like that, and there's other examples. There's like Baobab Studios stories, like Baba Yaga that recently came out, and even though these examples are out there, do you not think that that we've kind of come to some kind of understanding of what this medium is one day going to look like?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things here to unpack, right? So first off, it's basically determining how we're measuring success for VR narratives or what the storytelling medium could look like. And one could say, we're measuring success based on how much money like any one of these VR movies make, just relative to how much it took to produce. And I don't think we're at a point yet where it is super lucrative for creators to go in and make VR narratives, just because the field is super early and distribution still isn't there yet. And I think the prerequisite for something like Toy Story blowing up is the fact that like movie theaters already existed and people could see movies that weren't 3D animated, and all of that was still distributed in the exact same way. So people walked out of that theater going, that was a really great story and the technology got it there, but people weren't necessarily focused on the tech. They were more focused on the story because, they were already used to seeing narratives like this shown on a 2D screen, and they were used to absorbing stories that way. So while I think that everyone who's tried some of Baobab's recent work or Vader Immortal would agree that it was a super great example of what VR narratives could be, I'm not sure if they've reached that Toy Story moment yet. And I think that's it's due to a few different things, right? It's not necessarily a knock on the creators themselves.
What's it going to take?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think partially it's a distribution problem. Like a lot of this is, not a lot of people have VR headsets. That number is definitely growing, but ultimately not everyone even knows what VR has to offer. It's still pretty niche to a lot of people. And I don't think that was the case when, really pivotal movies came out that sort of pushed CGI and 3D graphics forward. So I think we still need to get to that point where VR isn't as niche. It's not considered, just like a tech thing or a gimmick. And I still think that we're making progress on that still hasn't been achieved.
I see. So yeah, because I mean, VR's kind of has to literally almost like start from scratch, like create a whole new freaking medium. Whereas with CG, with Toy Story, they were just like, oh, this is just a new way to make a movie. Whereas we're like, it's like, as opposed to, they're going from radio to television here. It's like a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of things changing here, right? It's the way in which you actually experience these stories is changing. The access that people have to it, the way that people actually operate within these stories, whether they have a ton of agency or whether they're just passive observers, all of those things are still being figured out and can vary from story to story. So I think generally people sort of collapse all of this into saying, we haven't figured out the language of VR, quote unquote. But I think that there are a couple different things there, right? Like we still haven't figured out, how much agency people should have in these narratives, whether that should even be consistent across every narrative, and how people actually step into these stories or how involved they are or how they're supposed to view them, or what it means to be a part of a VR narrative. Are you a character? Are you an observer? Are you the director? Are you just a camera in the scene? So much of that is still being figured out, and a lot of it varies from narrative to narrative.
Yeah, so that I mean that's those are some good points, but they all kind of seem to rest on the premise that interactivity is in fact involved in VR storytelling. Would you agree with that? That once
I
you
think there's the potential for it, but I don't think it means that every creator needs to take advantage of it. For example, there are a lot of really great narratives out there that are made with tools like Quill or with Anim VR. A lot of these in VR creation tools that allow artists to basically make 3D art natively in 3D using VR tools. And a lot of those stories right now aren't interactive. A lot of them are just allowing viewers to be passive viewers and basically see these stories and basically unfold around them rather than having any sort of involvement or being able to control the story in any way. And they're still really compelling. They're still super immersive. So I don't necessarily think the creators have to add interactivity in order to be, qualified to have a VR narrative. But at the same time, it is something that, it's an additional set of tools that they can now use to bring their viewers in.
so you're saying theoretically the VR storytelling medium of the future that is one day going to theoretically eclipse, our current favorite storytelling mediums could not even involve interactivity.
So I think it's an interesting question, but I actually want to backtrack here. I don't think that VR narratives are going to eclipse other forms of storytelling. I think they're going to add to the kinds of ways that we experience stories in the same way that, if you watch a movie, maybe you can experience the characters, that world in a different way through a game or through a theme park. Like there are just different ways to sort of see the angles of that story through, through different mediums. So it's not just on the screen. Maybe it's on your phone. Maybe it's through a game. Maybe it's through a physical installation. I think VR will be another one of those things, another angle by which people can actually experience that story.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, cuz like it's ultimately going to be it's just going to be these worlds that people are creating, the IP that we can now engage with in a different way. Uh so that I mean that question right there kind of introduces another like is VR like is that even the way then that we're going to want to tell stories like or is it just like is VR going to be all right, here's a VR experience. This is a game. It's not a movie. It's if you want to watch a movie, just throw on like a, 90-minute like feature film, but if you want to engage with the story with VR, that's not going to be like a movie or a story. That's going to be a game.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, right? Because the line actually feels really blurry here. People generally consider movies to be a passive experience where you sit down, like you said, Kobe's brain, sit down for 90 minutes and then just experience something. Whereas they see games as a more active form of entertainment where they're actually influencing things. And I think that VR narratives can have a little bit of both in the same way that maybe you go to some sort of like theme park attraction and maybe some of it is on rails, but some of it actually allows you as a participant to influence what's happening. One thing that comes to mind is the Galaxy's Edge ride, that's at Disneyland right now, where most of the experience is on rails. There's a very clear start and end time, but you actually have a little bit of agency. You can do different things. You can pilot the Millennium Falcon. You can shoot at things, and I think that's another way to experience that piece of the Star Wars universe. So in the same way, if people are actually able to inhabit that world, they're able to talk to the character, they're able to, go on other missions. That's just another way to experience that story. Is it a game? Is it a movie? Maybe we don't even have the right words to express it right now, but we know that it's another angle by which people can actually experience those characters and those worlds.
It's interesting, right? It's like that intersection of game and movie. It's like but that kind of brings up the question what are these what are they seem more like games than movies in that case.
Yeah, actually, I think that's right now, and a lot of that actually comes down to the tools that are used to build these experiences in the first place, right? So game engines like Unity and Unreal are the ones that are responsible for, a lot of the apps that we see on different VR headsets right now. It's one of the easiest way developers can get started. A lot of that carries over to filmmaking and animation as well. And a lot of that tooling is built on top of the idea that, people are using Unity and Unreal for games, which means that a lot of those paradigms just carry over to VR narratives. So I think that there is, sort of this like impending phase where our tooling starts to evolve in ways that allow us to do things that are more narrative specific. I don't know if those things are going to be built into tools like Unity or Unreal, or if, some other tool comes around, or we figure out a better way to build those narratives and come up with a different kind of language for it. I think that's like a really big part of this entire system that still needs to be figured out. So, I mentioned a couple tools before, like AnimVR and Quill. They're exploring different ways to sort of compose these VR narratives. And those tools didn't exist, 10 years ago. A lot of those have just popped up due to the imminence of VR in the first place. So I still think that we're seeing, like a really big push to improve our general tooling to get us a little bit closer to figuring out how we build and experience VR narratives.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess kind of my next question then has to do with some of the unique capabilities that we get from VR, such as branching narratives. I guess now I would just kind of throw out some of these potential features and see what you think about whether or not they are going to be integral components of the new medium. If you even think like, so I guess, yeah, branching narratives. What do you think about the experiences that you've seen with the branching narratives? Is that compelling enough? Is that something that people even care about at all?
Yeah, actually. So I think it's actually pretty cool. Like, this definitely exists in games to some extent. It feels very different when you're in VR. You have a sense of presence. You actually feel close to the characters and the environment that you're inhabiting. But it also gets a little bit crazier when the experience is multiplayer and you're there with other people and you have just a shared sense of social presence. And, you're able to interact with the characters. Maybe there are real actors behind them, or you're able to interact with other participants. I think a lot of the parallels here actually draw back to immersive theater and a little bit of games, but I think there's a lot of potential here that just hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be interesting. We recently had a talk from Eric Darnell from Baobab, who talked about kind of the fact that kind of what he viewed as one of the most promising aspects of VR storytelling being the fact that, right, cinema is an empathy machine, but with branching narratives in VR, the viewer actually has to act as opposed to just like view passively, and when they act, that takes empathy a step further towards actually instilling compassion for the characters, because of the fact that the participant is actually taking action in the story. What do you think about that?
Okay, so I think I understand where this is coming from. And a lot of this language started popping up after people started watching Chris Milk's TED Talk from 2015. He was on stage, he brought like a Google Cardboard out, and he was like, VR is an empathy machine. And everyone started using that same language. And I think to some extent, yes, this is true, but like I don't know if that's the reason for why VR narratives will become popular. I think it's true that yes, you feel a little bit closer to, the subjects of the experience that you're in. It's definitely different than watching a YouTube video or just reading about something online. It's a different perspective, and to be in that environment, I think is really, really powerful. That being said, I feel like this has mostly been used as a sales tactic without any substance backing it up. For example, there are some VR narratives that actually just have stories that aren't that great. And at that point, if you don't actually engage with the characters of the world, there's really nothing to empathize with there. And ultimately that sense of empathy doesn't get built up unless you actually have a strong story as your foundation. So I would say there's still lessons that we can take from traditional storytelling that actually carry over to VR or to any sort of like new form of storytelling, whether that's VR, AR, whatever. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's mostly been used as a sales thing, especially in the past couple of years.
Yeah, that brings up kind of another question is how much how much of the lessons from film and TV and gaming should we take into this new medium, or should we just do you think we should just kind of scrap all assumptions of how we think stories are supposed to be told based on these other mediums and say, all right, with this new medium, let's just mess around, see what we can make, and see what happens? Or do you think that there should be kind of more structure to our approach to approaching this new medium?
Yeah, Kobe's brain, it's a good question. And we kind of touched on this last time as well. But I think ultimately creators are not going to be rewarded just for making stories in VR. Just by putting someone inside a world or next to a character doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to engage with that world or character in a different way. I think fundamentally storytelling is still really important, and figuring out, the sequence of events or figuring out why someone should care about that world or that character, those are all fundamentals that still carry over to making stories in VR. That's definitely not going to go away. So for example, if I have a character that's just not appealing or one that audiences just don't care about, it actually doesn't matter whether that character is in VR, on my phone, on a TV screen, whatever. Ultimately, the story just falls flat. And I think that that's still something that creators should be worried about, or they should be spending a lot of time figuring out before they start expending a bunch of resources to bring their work into VR.
That's a good point. So, what other advice then do you have for these aspiring, the people who aspire to, create the original content for this new medium?
Yeah, actually, I think this is more of like a discussion point, right? So assuming that we all know, well, understanding that we all have a limited time on Earth, we have a limited number of resources that we can use at this point in time to make creative work. As a creator, I think you should really be asking yourself, like, where would I rather show my work, or like who do I want to engage with? Where's my audience? And ultimately, right now, I don't know if VR is the reason that people should be getting into making VR narratives just because the medium's new or because it's nascent. I think ultimately creators just have to ask themselves, like, if I'm going to put in a year of work or several years of work, would I rather see a film that ends up on YouTube or going to festivals or whatever, or would I rather see it in a headset distributed on, a platform that's still pretty new, or distributed on headsets that a lot of people still don't have access to? So I think it's really a question of like, knowing that you're going to expend a lot of effort on this thing, where would you rather have it end up? And, people have opinions about this, and like, I understand why people do it for different reasons, but ultimately I think it's a good discussion to have. And if you're a creator, a good question to ask yourself before you actually start doing all that work.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And if that answer is like, do you think there is value in, just like pursuing this medium as an end in itself, just being like, look, this is something new and exciting, and it 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 could be cool just to make a VR film.
Yeah, so I mean, there is no better time to get into VR for sure. There are a lot more people with headsets, a lot more people understand what the value proposition of VR is. And I think this is a really great time to get stories into their hands and actually show people, or actually as a creator, make a name for yourself really early on. So I think if that's your goal, if that's the kind of work that you want to do, I think understanding the risks being, hey, distribution is still really early, the tools still haven't been figured out, everyone is still experimenting. Those are the risks. I think with all that said, if you still want to sort of take the leap and make something novel, make something new, and engage with an audience that still doesn't understand what VR has to offer, I think this is a really good time to actually dive in. And it's only getting better. I feel like a couple years ago, even just a couple years ago, not that many people understood what VR had to offer. Not that many people had headsets. Before Quest, for example, VR headsets still had to be connected to a really powerful computer in order to even run in the first place. Whereas now standalone VR is kind of the state of the art, and it's only getting better from here.
Nice. Yeah, it's true. I mean, they're pretty great. Tech the tech is honestly like pretty much there. I guess we just are waiting for those stories that make people want to buy the tech or something. But it seems like the jury's kind of still out about this future medium. Like, is it going to be interactive? Is it going to be passive? Is it going to be branching narrative? Is it going to be linear narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually worth mentioning that it could be all of those things or none of those things.
Yeah.
Like, there's a very good reason for a narrative to be interactive if it actually pushes your story forward. But, I think a recurring theme in this conversation, Coby's brain, is that, creators shouldn't be doing something just because it's novel, right? They shouldn't be getting into VR just because it's VR. They shouldn't add interactivity just because, everyone else is doing it. If it's not actually pushing your story forward or allowing your audience to engage with your world or characters in a meaningful way, then it's not worth the effort, because ultimately, the story is still the core of what makes these narratives compelling. And I think that's still the most important takeaway for creators who are considering actually making that leap.
Yeah, I think that's important. If you're trying to make a VR storytelling medium, you know, it's just a medium for storytelling. So you better have a good story to tell.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Which,
I think you put it very aptly, Coby's brain.
but what exactly the way that you tell that story with this medium is going to look like, we don't know. Which brings me to my next question, which I also think you might have some insights about, Mr. Teddy Toast. What about AR storytelling?
Yeah, I think it's so we've seen a little bit of this being explored with apps like Pokemon Go and other Niantic projects, right? Actually bringing AR into our physical world, and or bringing those narratives or those interactive components into our physical world, and not allowing people to explore physical spaces as being a part of that whole narrative feels like a really cool opportunity that I think hasn't been explored enough. I think part of it is, not everyone has the resources that companies like Niantic have. And, a lot of this field is still early and the hardware definitely isn't there. But, I think there are a lot of really cool explorations that are being done right now. I've seen everything from, people who've been exploring tabletop AR and what those stories could look like, to quote unquote, like world-based AR, where people are actually moving around physical spaces, sometimes even multiple miles to, find different pieces of a story and sort of put all that together. So I think there's still a lot of explorations being done, just like in VR. But I think now people can actually take advantage of the real world and basically what that has to offer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. Any final words regarding this topic that has, ultimately, as most deep topics do, proven somewhat inconclusive?
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this and you haven't actually tried a VR headset, I understand that some of this might seem super hand wavy, but if this conversation actually piqued your interest and you get to try something in VR, I think that's the best way to understand what the real differences are between, watching a movie on your TV or in a theater versus actually being a part of the story or being a part of the narrative when you're in the headset. So, Coby's brain, you mentioned a couple titles. I think Vader Immortal is really cool to check out. It's a 3-part series where you are actually a character in the Star Wars universe, and it's a completely different way to experience that story and to see these characters that you recognize on screen, but now actually standing next to you and interacting with you, talking to you. Yeah, or fighting you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that wasn't possible, uh, even 10 years ago. And it's kind of incredible to see how much progress we've made in terms of, the quality of the art, the quality of the tech, how easy it is to access. So I feel like we're making a ton of progress as an industry. And I think it's really exciting to see where everything will go in the coming years, coming decades. So ultimately, I think the takeaway here is if you haven't tried a VR narrative, then that's the best way to understand it. Just once you put on your headset, once you're there, it'll just make sense. So I'm excited to see more people experiencing those kinds of stories and getting their minds blown for the first time.
Yes, sir. Hey, thank you, Teddy's Toast. Give it up for Teddy Toast, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Coby's Brain. It's always very fun.
Oh yeah. I'm sure you'll be back very soon. All right, that's our show. Give it up for Ron Roach. Give it up for Teddy Toast. Give it up for the Alien Gang. Yeah, true. Alien Gang, we got Coby. It's the crew. And we'll see you next time on Coby's Brain.